The rain came down like nails on the asphalt, turning the gas station parking lot into a sheet of black glass that reflected the neon signs overhead. I kicked the stand down on my Road King and killed the engine, feeling the rumble die between my legs like a heartbeat fading. The leather on my jacket was soaked through, cold against my skin, and I could taste the diesel fumes mixing with the wet air. I was 200 miles from home, riding through a storm I should have avoided, chasing nothing but the need to keep moving. That's when I saw him. A man in a wheelchair, parked under the overhang by the convenience store entrance, watching me with eyes that held too much knowing. His face was weathered, scarred along the left side like someone had dragged him across gravel, and his hands rested on the wheels of his chair with a familiarity that spoke of years, not months. He stared at my vest, at the patch on the back, and his mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. When I walked past him toward the door, he spoke. "I used to have a Harley," he said, voice rough as sandpaper before the accident. I stopped. Most people don't just say things like that to strangers, especially not to bikers they don't know. There was weight in those words, a history that hung in the air between us like smoke. I turned and looked at him properly then, taking in the dead legs beneath the blanket across his lap, the way his shoulders were built strong despite everything, the tattoos that crawled up his forearms beneath the rain-dampened sleeves. If you're still here, consider subscribing, because this story is just beginning, and what happens next changed everything I thought I knew about loyalty and revenge. He saw me looking and nodded toward my vest again. "Devil's Ridge MC," he said. "I know that patch. Used to see it around back when I could still ride." His voice carried no bitterness, just statement of fact, but there was something underneath it, something darker. I felt my jaw tighten. Devil's Ridge wasn't a huge club, but we had history, and not all of it was clean. "You ride with him?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. He shook his head slowly. "No, but I knew some of your brothers. Long time ago." The way he said it made my skin prickle despite the cold. I should have walked away. Should have grabbed my coffee and gotten back on the road, left this ghost of a man to his memories and his wheelchair and whatever demons kept him parked at a gas station in the middle of nowhere during a storm. But something in his eyes held me there, something that looked like recognition, like he knew me even though I'd never seen him before in my life. "What happened?" I asked, and I hated how much I wanted to know. He glanced around the parking lot, at the few cars huddled against the rain, then back at me. "You got a few minutes?" he asked. "Because if you're wearing that patch, you deserve to hear this." I nodded and moved closer, standing just inside the overhang where the rain couldn't reach. He studied my face for a long moment, as if deciding whether I could handle what he was about to say. Then he began. His name was Marcus, and 12 years ago, he'd been riding his own Harley, a custom softail he'd built from the frame up, through these same back roads on his way to a rally in Sturgis. He wasn't in a club, he said, never wanted that kind of structure, but he respected the culture, knew the rules, understood the brotherhood, even from the outside. That night, he'd stopped at a bar called the Iron Horse, about 40 miles east of where we were now. The place was packed with bikers from 3 different clubs, including a heavy presence from Devil's Ridge. Marcus had kept to himself, had a few beers, minded his own business. But trouble has a way of finding you even when you're not looking for it. There was a girl at the bar, young and pretty, and she'd been talking to one of the Devil's Ridge guys, a hothead named Reese who had a reputation for violence and a short fuse. Marcus hadn't known any of this at the time. When the girl started talking to him instead, asking about his bike, he'd just been friendly, nothing more. Reese saw it differently. The confrontation started inside, escalated outside, and Marcus said he'd try to defuse it, had even apologized for something he hadn't done wrong. But Reese was drunk and angry and looking for a reason. 3 other Devil's Ridge members were there too, watching, and Marcus said he remembered their faces even now, could still see them in his nightmares. They didn't stop Reese. They didn't step in when he threw the first punch, or the second, or when he grabbed a tire iron from someone's saddlebag. Marcus said he fought back, landed a few good hits, but 4 against 1 was never going to end well. He remembered the iron coming down on his knee, remembered the sound of bone breaking, remembered the pavement rushing up to meet his face. And he remembered Reese standing over him, telling him that this was what happened when you disrespected the club. Then they'd gotten on their bikes and left him there, bleeding in the parking lot, while the rest of the bar pretended they hadn't seen anything. The bartender called an ambulance eventually, but the damage was done. His spine had been compressed when he hit the ground, 3 vertebrae shattered, and the doctor said he'd never walk again. I felt something cold settle in my chest as he talked, a dread that grew with every detail. Reese. I knew that name. Everyone in Devil's Ridge knew that name, though not many talked about him anymore. He'd been VP of the club 12 years ago, ran with a crew that played by their own rules, and there'd been rumors, whispers of things done that crossed lines even we didn't cross. Then one day he was just gone, patched out, and the official story was that he'd moved south, retired from the life. But standing there listening to Marcus, I understood that there was more to it. You never went to the cops, I said, and it wasn't a question. He laughed, bitter and short. And say what? That 4 bikers beat me half to death because I talked to a girl? You know how that would have gone. Besides, I didn't want to be the guy who ratted. I had my pride, even if I didn't have my legs anymore. His hands gripped the wheelchair arms tighter. But I never forgot. I spent 12 years learning to live again, learning to accept what happened, trying to let go of the anger. And most days, I manage it. But then I see that patch, and it all comes back. The rain had softened to a drizzle, and somewhere in the distance, I could hear the highway humming with traffic. My mind was racing, connecting dots I didn't want to connect. Devil's Ridge had changed a lot in 12 years. New president, new rules, a cleaner reputation. But the old debts, the old sins, they didn't just disappear because we wanted them to. They lingered, waiting in gas station parking lots in wheelchairs, wearing scars like evidence. Why are you telling me this? I asked, though I already knew. Marcus looked up at me with eyes that had seen too much suffering and not enough justice. Because you're wearing that patch, he said quietly. And I need to know if it means something different now than it did back then. I need to know if your brotherhood protects men like Reese, or if it holds them accountable. The question hung between us like a blade, sharp and unavoidable, and I felt the weight of it pressing against every value I thought I understood about loyalty and family. I joined Devil's Ridge 5 years ago, long after Reese was gone, long after whatever house cleaning had happened to scrub away the stains from the old days. The brothers I rode with were solid, men I'd trust with my life, men who lived by a code that meant something. But history doesn't die just because you bury it. And standing there looking at Marcus in his wheelchair, I realized that my patch carried debts I'd never known about, sins I'd inherited without consent. Reese is gone, I said finally, patched out years before I joined. The club now, it's different. We don't operate like that anymore. Marcus nodded slowly, like he'd expected that answer, but wasn't satisfied with it. Different, he repeated. But he's still out there, isn't he? Still walking around free while I can't walk at all. Still breathing easy while I wake up every night with phantom pain in legs that don't even work. His voice cracked slightly, and I saw him force it back under control. Your club might be different, but the debt isn't paid. And I'm tired of carrying it alone. I thought about walking away again, about firing on my bike and leaving Marcus to his pain and his past. It would have been easier, cleaner, to pretend I'd never heard this story, never seen the evidence of what my brothers had done before I knew them. But I couldn't. Something in me, something that had been forged in the same fires that made me put on this patch in the first place, wouldn't let me turn my back. What do you want? I asked. It was the only question that mattered now. Marcus stared at me for a long time, rain dripping from the overhang behind me, the neon signs buzzing overhead. I wanted to face what he did, he said. I wanted to look at me, see what he took, and carry that weight for once instead of me. I don't know if that's revenge or justice, but I know I can't move forward until it happens. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, worn from handling. I found him, Marcus said. Took me years, but I found where he is. Lives 2 states over, runs a motorcycle repair shop, still rides, still free. I've sat outside that shop a dozen times, watching him work, watching him laugh with customers, watching him live the life he stole from me. The paper felt heavy when he handed it to me, heavier than it should have been, like it carried the weight of 12 years of pain compressed into a single address. I didn't unfold it. "Why haven't you confronted him yourself?" I asked. Marcus gestured to his wheelchair with a bitter smile. "Because I'm half a man now, and he'd just see that as proof he won. Because I'm afraid if I face him, I'll try to do something I can't come back from, and I've already lost too much of my life to him. But you," he looked at my patch again, "you represent what he was. You could make him answer for it in a way I can't." I felt the trap closing around me, the impossible choice spreading out in every direction. If I did nothing, I was complicit in what had happened, another link in the chain of brotherhood that protected monsters. If I went after Reese on my own, I was acting outside the club, taking justice into my hands without the authority or backup of my brothers. And if I brought this to the club, I'd be opening old wounds that had been deliberately sealed, potentially tearing apart the fragile peace that had been built over the last decade. But standing there with that paper in my hand, looking at a man who'd had everything taken from him by someone wearing the same symbol I wore now, I understood that doing nothing wasn't actually an option, no matter how much easier it would have been. "I need to think about this," I said. "I need to talk to some people, figure out the right way to handle it." Marcus nodded, though disappointment flickered across his face. "I've been thinking about it for 12 years, he said. "Take your time. But know this, brother, every day that passes while he walks free is another day I sit in this chair knowing that the code everyone talks about, the honor and loyalty and justice, it's all just words when it comes down to it. Words that didn't mean anything for me." He started to will himself away, then stopped and turned back. "You know what the worst part is?" he asked. "It's not the pain, not even the disability. It's that they made me nothing, made me not matter, made my life disposable because I wasn't one of them. And every brother who's worn that patch since and done nothing about it, they've agreed with that choice." I watched him disappear into the convenience store, and I stood there in the drizzle feeling the weight of the patch on my back in a way I never had before. I thought about my brothers, about the men I'd bled with, ridden with, the men who'd become my family. I thought about the code we lived by, the promises we made to each other and to ourselves about what we stood for. And I thought about Reese, somewhere 2 states over, working on motorcycles and living free while Marcus spent another day in that wheelchair. The choice crystallized in my mind with a clarity that was almost painful. I couldn't speak for the club on this, couldn't make them answer for sins committed before most of us joined. But I could speak for myself. I could decide what my patch meant to me, what kind of man I wanted to be when I wore it. I got on my phone and made a call, waiting through 3 rings before a familiar voice answered. "Vic," I said, speaking to my sponsor, the man who'd brought me in a Devil's Ridge, who'd taught me what the patch was supposed to mean. "We need to talk about Reese." The conversation lasted 20 minutes, and it went places I hadn't expected, revealed truths that had been kept buried not out of protection, but out of shame. Vic told me that the old guard had known what Reese was, had tried to control him, had finally forced him out when it became clear he was a liability they couldn't contain. But they'd never made it right with his victims, had never done the hard work of actual justice, just swept him out and pretended that was enough. "The club made mistakes back then," Vic said, his voice heavy. "We all knew it. We just told ourselves we'd fixed it by getting rid of the bad apples. But you can't fix something without acknowledging what was broken." I told him about Marcus, about the wheelchair and the scars and the 12 years of pain. I told him what Marcus wanted, and I told him what I thought we owed. There was a long silence on the other end of the line, and then Vic said, "Give me 24 hours. I need to talk to some brothers, need to see if we're ready to really face this." I agreed and ended the call, then walked back into the convenience store. Marcus was by the coffee machine, pouring a cup with hands that shook slightly. I made some calls. I told him, "I can't promise anything, but I'm going to try to make this right." 24 hours later, 5 of us rode out to that repair shop 2 states over. 5 brothers, including Vic and the current president, all of us wearing our patches, all of us understanding that this was about more than just Marcus. Reese was there, older now, grayer, but I recognized him from old photos, recognized the violence that still lived in his eyes. The confrontation was tense, ugly, and for a while I thought it might turn into exactly the kind of violence that had started all this. But Vic held the line, kept it controlled, and made Reese understand that his debt had come due. We didn't beat him, didn't take his legs the way he'd taken Marcus's ability to use his. Instead, we made him write a check for more money than he'd probably seen in his life, made him sign a confession, and made him understand that if he ever rode in club colors again, anywhere, the reckoning would be swift and final. Then we brought Marcus to that shop, and we made Reese look at him, made him see what he'd done, made him apologize to a man he'd destroyed for nothing more than pride and rage. Marcus sat in his wheelchair in that repair shop, surrounded by motorcycles he'd never ride again, and he listened to Reese's apology with a face like stone. When it was done, he looked at me and nodded once, a gesture that carried more weight than words. We left after that, left Reese with his shame and his debt, left Marcus with something that maybe wasn't justice but was at least acknowledgement. On the ride home, I thought about what it meant to wear the patch, about how brotherhood wasn't just about protecting each other, but about being willing to face the ugliest parts of our history and make them right. The rain had cleared by then, and the sun was setting in streaks of gold and red across the highway. I rode with my brothers, feeling the rumble of the engine beneath me, and I understood something I hadn't before. The code we lived by only mattered if we were willing to enforce it, even when it was hard, even when it meant confronting our own. Marcus had spent 12 years in that wheelchair, carrying a burden that should never have been his alone. We couldn't give him back his legs, couldn't undo the violence that had been done in our name. But we could choose to be different, to be better, to make the patch mean something more than just power and brotherhood. We could choose to be men who made things right, even when it cost us everything. And sometimes, in the end, that choice is the only thing that separates honor from hypocrisy, brotherhood from just another gang wearing leather and riding steel.